We're going to go in the order that they're seated here. Dr. Dianna Wentzell, who is the Commissioner of Education in the state of Connecticut. We're very honored to have her with us. Dr. Herman Clark, who has run a school which supported the school development program, so we're going to hear from him about that. Dr. Carol Birks, who is the superintendent in New Haven Public Schools. We are honored to have her presence. Dr. Jack Gillette. And Jack, I don't have your biography in front of me, so tell me.
Was formerly dean at Lesley University and had the great luck to be 11 years on the School Development Program Central Staff.
Fantastic. So he knows it from the inside out. And we're going to dive right into the issues that really have to do with how do we keep this kind of work going and planted. And we're fortunate that in Connecticut there is a really strong focus on this kind of work that we've just been talking about. Dianna, can you start us off by talking about where does developing the whole child and encouraging and enabling all schools to do so stand among your strategic priorities at this time and the commitment in Connecticut?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to that. And I feel so proud and honored to serve for a state board of education that has put this as their #1 priority for their 5-year strategic plan. Our state board, by statute, has a comprehensive strategic plan for public education that right now we're in the middle of our 2016 to 2021 plan. As a result of widespread stakeholder engagement, we heard from so many parents, educators, and other people concerned with education in Connecticut that we needed to really focus our priorities in this plan. And our state board has conceptualized their plan in terms of 4 promises to our children and their families. And those promises are centered around great schools for all kids, effective educators in our schools, and making sure that our kids' learning priorities are clear, meaning that we have really clear content standards approved by the board and assessments to help us know they're getting there, both in terms of academics and social emotional. But the other promise that they at first conceptualized as their 4th promise and then elevated to their 1st is that our students' non-academic needs will be met so that they are healthy and ready to learn. So I think that's really important. We also took a step that we had not previously, and our board pushed us to make all 4 of our goals have measurements with them that we report to our board semi-annually so that they can make sure that we're keeping on track on delivering on their promises to our kids and their families. So that keeps us very focused. It also pushed us when the opportunity a year later came along to change our accountability system under ESSA to move to a multifaceted system that has 12 indicators, 30% of which are related to school climate and social emotional learning. So we are very proud of moving into a system also that even in the required 70% that needs to be about academic achievement, which is still, of course, very, very important, that growth counts equally to achievement annually. So it's not only about getting kids to an imaginary and arbitrary line called proficiency, but it's really also about whether each kid got the growth that they were promised this year. So we think even within a still restrictive framework, we've been able to push and have Connecticut be a state that really has made statements that all kids deserve schools that they want to be at. All families deserve to be engaged with schools in a positive way. And just this past week, our board has come forward with a policy statement on parent engagement that has led to a framework for full, equal, and equitable partnerships with parents that we're very proud of.
Indeed. Actually, I think the Connecticut accountability system under ESSA is very innovative. Do you want to say anything more about some of the indicators that are in that framework? Because it's one of the more interesting approaches in the entire country.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. We came forward, and it was a hard fight to get it, really, with a system that honors growth with an equal weight. So one of the things it does, besides that how much a student has grown this year counts equally to their level of proficiency, is that every point of growth counts. So there are no more imaginary lines in our system, and growth is honored. Additionally, growth for high-need students, and for us in Connecticut, that's students who are either receiving special services, are English learners, or students living in poverty, gets twice as many points in the system. So by adding more weight to the learning of our most vulnerable students and the growth and development of our most vulnerable students, we really, I think, have asked people to turn their focus to making sure that kids' needs are met. There's no way for the kids that need us the most to get what they need from us without us taking a whole child approach. So we believe that turning people's attention toward the kids that need us the most will make the kinds of changes we hope to see. And we're hoping this will be a productive policy lever. We are beginning to get the kind of questions that indicate that we've got their attention.
That's great. And then there are indicators about school climate, around access to certain kinds of learning opportunities.
And we hope to continue to develop these indicators to improve over time, but for now, we've included access to arts coursework as an important indicator. Our school climate indicator, we're currently using chronic absenteeism. We'd like to add to that, but right now we don't have a statewide school climate survey, but we hope to be able to add to that. And also physical fitness and wellness. And we've made some changes in how we assess that we think will also help change practice. So it's a growth-oriented look, not a moment-in-time look. But we think even just having these indicators there pushes us to a different place with our accountability.
Paying attention to more of the developmental pathways. Thank you. And I would like to ask Dr. Clark, who has deep experience with the school development program, to share your story about the impact of the school development program in the school you ran, and what was the reaction to the academic results that your school achieved?
Good morning. Please excuse me if I become a little emotional with this, because as our keynote speaker said earlier, we have labeled schools, but we have labeled principals also.
Yeah.
And I want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
Now, I was the recipient of a troubled school, low test scores, students of color, lacking of resources, and a lot of disabilities. And in my school system, you were considered a successful school if you were accredited or if you could pass the competency test. And we only emphasized one of the pathways, and that was the cognitive part. We were told by the superintendent school board, test, academics only. Now, my students come from troubled homes. We were not supposed to look at their emotional stability, their physical stability, linguistic, and so forth. We only looked at the cognitive. So we tried so many things. We worked hard, but we didn't work smart. And then when the Comer model came, initially I thought this was just another theory. But when we were told to look at the whole child, and especially in our area, we had to look at the whole child. We had members from the Comer team to go into our classrooms, review data, analyze what was going on, interact with teachers, and then ask teachers to take a self-assessment and see if they could find the root of the problem. And then we began to look at the village. And at first I'm saying, what is the village? And I had to look at everybody my kids came in contact with. I got the coaches of the basketball team, football team, members of the faith-based institute, all of the churches, the ministers, the Boy Scout, Girl Scout leaders, PTA, Civic League. We got all of those people together and said, we got to see to it that our kids succeed. And all of them was working together. And then the glue that brought all of this together our school system hired our facilitator to bring everything together, and Lorraine Bullock. Raise your hand, Lorraine. And she was there, she's in the back, to help us. And I tell you, she empowered the parents. We took a busload of parents to the General Assembly in Richmond. And can you see my ghetto mamas and daddies speaking at the General Assembly? And they spoke with a lot of substance. And they spoke at school board meetings. So we had all of this pulled together. The superintendent gave us permission to have our parents as substitute teachers. Now, can you imagine all the money we saved went back into the fund, and the parents just love the idea of coming to school dressed up in the classroom. Now, the last part of this was the students. I had to make sure my students could believe in themselves that they could do. And it wasn't easy, and it wasn't a thing that happened overnight. But after preparation, months, years of preparation, before the test came along, we met 6 months on Saturdays, and we worked on the academics. We worked on their all pathways. We had parents to come out. We worked with parents in workshops. And so we felt pretty good about this upcoming test. And the day of the test, my kids were excited, and we made sure we had 100% attendance. Those kids worked so hard, and when we got the test results, Bowling Park School, we started at the 29th percentile, but after a couple of years, we were number 1 in the city of Norfolk. And people, my kids were just so full of joy. My parents were elated. All of us were excited. I got a call to come down to the superintendent's office. I was, we're going to be celebrating. Dr. Clark, your school cheated. I said, oh my gosh, all of this work we had done. We did so much work, we got the village involved. Students believed in themselves. And I'm saying, on what grounds? People, there was no evidence that they had done this. But your kids can't do as well as the kids on the west side of town. That's what I was told. Then I was also told when people move into Norfolk, they want to go to the neighborhood that had the highest test scores. They would be driven around the projects. So they said something is wrong. And then I was told that the kids would have to be retested. Can you see me going back to my parents who put in all of that work, and more so back to the students? And I had to talk to the students in a way they understood. I told them, boys and girls, you colored black kids in the ghetto, people don't think you are as smart as the kids across town. And they were angry, but I told them to put their anger in their mind and work from that point. Now we know we get out in June. The first week of June, central office came to test our kids, where everybody's hyper, but we prepared our kids for that. They brought the test with them. We couldn't even touch the test, the staff and myself. They stood over the children as they took the test. Man, that's intimidation. But the kids were prepared for that. And they did all of this, and people, at the end of that, they scored 2 points higher. We scored in the 91st percentile. Thank you so much. But can you imagine if the parents didn't want, and they didn't want them to be retested. They kept saying it's not fair. But I told them right now we have no choice. But the kids believe here. And if you believe in something, nothing can change that. They believed that they could do that well. And when they thought we cheated, it was on the front page of the paper. When it came back that we did better, it was in the middle part of the paper. But that's okay, we did that. And then I'm just going to close with this saying that we did every morning. My 3-year-olds, pre-K to 11-year-olds, 5th graders had to learn this. Parents, staff, and we said it every morning and we said it with an attitude. I'm somebody. The me I see is the me I'll be. Respect me, protect me, but never reject me. Down with dope, up with hope. Because every day and in every way, I am getting better and better. I am happy, I'm healthy, I'm hopeful, I'm brave, I'm bold, and I am beautiful. It's not what you're called, but it's what you answer to. It's not the clothes that make the person, it's the person that makes the clothes. If it is to be, it is up to me. It's not what you think you are that hinders you, it's what you think you're not. Never go to bed a loser, but always wake up a winner. Shoot for the moon, and if you don't hit the moon, at least you'll land among the stars. Act the way you want to become, and soon you will become the way you act. I can, I must, my mind is a pearl, and I can do anything in this world. Your attitude determines your altitude. What you think about, you bring about. Work hard and watch good things happen. And whatever you do, do it so well that no man living, no man dead, and no man yet to be born can do it any better than you.
Woo! So Dr. Carol Birks, the superintendent in New Haven. That's a hard act to follow, but we are going to give you the opportunity to talk about what's going on in New Haven that is supporting this kind of work, and what are some of the more pressing issues that are facing education in New Haven, as well as the ways in which you're responding to those.
Good morning. My comments won't be as passionate. But I want to thank Dr. Comer and the school development team for allowing me to be here and be on the panel with such prestigious colleagues. And I just thought back when I was sitting here back in the summer of 2006, when I had an opportunity, the only administrator from my district that came to a training with the school development program, and all these larger districts were here, and I was there by myself, and Dr. Levitt, Dr. Comer, Dr. Brown, everyone embraced me, and I learned a lot, and took the tools that I used and implemented it in my practice. So I want to thank you openly for that, so thank you very much. So as I enter, I'm in my 7th month as superintendent here in New Haven Public Schools. Part of my entry, I learned a lot from all of you, so my comments are based on the research that I collected from you, as well as, of course, my individual study of the district. And I would dare say, you know, as the most pressing issues facing New Haven right now is, as a district, we need effective governance and policy to move forward our efforts to improve our learning and teaching throughout the district. Additionally, we're faced with some fiscal challenges. You know, as we know, the state has some constraints on its resources, the city, and as a result, it's also facing the school district. We are also faced with managing, like, what is effective pedagogical practices? What approaches should we use to make sure that we're maximizing our staff so that they provide effective instruction that includes logical thinking, providing students with authentic learning experiences, and making sure that the learning and teaching is rigorous, as well as balancing our fiscal resources, ensuring that we're building the capacity of the staff who are on the front line. You know, I had an example, I had a community conversation, so throughout my 7 months, I've had like 11 community conversations, town hall meetings, one-on-one meetings, and, you know, visited all the schools. And someone said to me, why would you invest money in building the capacity of your school leaders and teachers? They should know that already. And I was like, wow. Well, we're in a profession of learning and continuous learning. And so galvanizing the community to have a collective beliefs and structures and thinking about how we educate our students from an academic perspective, as well as how do we meet their, what we call their affective developmental needs, their social emotional needs. And drilling down as a district, saying, okay, these are the beliefs, structures, and practices that we share holistically with everyone. So engaging the family and community involvement. As we know, my journey to the superintendency here, it was fraught with lots of challenges and people and opinions, and I still prevailed. So, but with that said, collectively getting us all, every stakeholder, every teacher, every leader, every bus driver, every custodian, every community leader and family on this one vision, one purpose is how we best educate students in New Haven, what are their cognitive needs, and what are their social emotional needs, and seeing our students as assets and building on the assets of our students. Our students are rich with they come from very many countries, languages, cultures, and how do we shift mindsets? We need to get deeper into mindset shifts and create a community of outward mindset. I've talked to a lot of people, and there's a lot of me, you know, and understanding their needs and adult needs. And I believe building the capacity of adults are very important, but we're faced with how do we build capacity of our adults with the resources that we have, make sure we educate our children, as well as create governance structures in which people feel like they have voice in the decision-making throughout our district. Of course, adult voice, teacher voice, leader voice, the board, community, as well as our students, and helping them to see themselves in their learning and creating a district that's a model district for all. And so these are, I mentioned a few of them, but the major highlights are how do we fiscally manage effectively? Are we right-sizing or looking at our district and utilizing our human capital effectively so that we make sure that our students get what they need, as well as we know, as a community, we have many English language learners, we have students who have special needs, and making sure that we have individualized plans for all students, not just the students with IEPs, but all students, as well as our adults. Because we are, as I mentioned, that comment about learning, each adult, and that's our challenge to my team, how do we create individualized plans for each adult in our organization so that they grow and learn as well? I talked with, throughout my community conversations, many of our staff who are in the non-certified staff, and some of them came up to me and said, you know, I haven't learned in 25 years or 30 years, and we're in the learning profession. And so, again, how do we create, we're faced with, how do we create conditions that we organize ourselves in a way that we build capacity so that we can scale learning? And we have some pockets of excellence in our district. We have districts, some of our schools are model school development program schools, but we've been faced with how do we scale our practices so that we have systemically moved the district forward. We've had opportunities to have, and thanks to Commissioner Wentzell, to have receive dollars in terms of school improvement planning dollars and district improvement planning dollars. But we've invested in people, so hiring people, but not the practices that will yield us large-scale change and reform. And looking at how we utilize our dollars differently so that we build capacity for within, we bring in resources, and then once the dollars are gone, because that's what's happened in our district now, we had declining revenue. So people are saying, well, why are we doing this and more? Or why do we have to have reductions in force? Because we didn't embed those practices so that longer-term, large-scale change and sustainability would occur.
Thank you.
It wasn't as attractive, but it was our reality.
So Jack, you've worked on this from the inside out, and I wonder what your thoughts are. I was thinking as Dr. Burks was speaking about the fact that the school development program has been well rooted in New Haven at points in time, but then has receded and then has come back. You know, what's really required to sustain this kind of work over a period of time without the ebb and flow and pendulum swings, and what are some of the impediments that you've seen to the widespread implementation of the approach, as well as some of the responses to those impediments.
Well, thank you. And first of all, it's just a great pleasure to be able to get a chance to talk to all of you and to acknowledge the legacy of 50 years of change. It's just unbelievable to think of what 1968 the education field looked like in 1968 and think about what that field looks like in 2018. And I think those changes create both opportunities and I think more challenges and barriers to doing scale and sustainability around change. So many of our schools were unbelievably great, but the sustainability issues were really challenging. And it's also intriguing to think that you were doing turnaround work in 1968. You know, turnaround is a more recent term, and lots of enthusiasm around turnaround, but nowhere near the rate of impact that the school development program did. These were not new settings, these were not new creations, these are hope that you have making do better, which was one of, I think, the most incredible aspects of the work. I think one of the legacies that you bequeath to everyone, Dr. Comer, is not just your relentless drumbeat child and adolescent development in central place, but also that you provided a way for that change to happen. And I think sometimes that's undervalued. I was really appreciative of your remarks today, talking about that the model itself isn't just an idea. We have a plethora of ideas. We have a plethora of powerful ideas, but we have too few powerful ways to make change. And for learning and development to embed child development, that's the core of a school, and we have lots of research about how hard that kind of change is. You can change things on the ancillary side of the house, but to really change people's mindset about how they approach the core aspect of work is extraordinarily challenging. And so all of those three mechanisms, the operations and the guiding principles, are so essential to understand that schools, despite being bureaucratic, are actually under-organized for collective action, and that you can't harness collective action if you don't let people have a say. You know, it's just, and I love the fact, those of you who are a little older than me or my age, remember the word collaboration always used to mean working with the enemy, right? If you've been in schools, you know that that's real. I mean, these are hard human systems because people do not like to not do well. So people don't respond well to not doing well. It doesn't mean they don't want to do well. So many of the Comer schools I walked into that were failed schools, 2 years later, they completely turned around, and those same people went from pessimistic, cynical, and defensive to optimistic, practical, because their agency was restored as people who could do the work that they wanted to do. Just so many of those elements were incredibly important. The one thing that I think is particularly programmatic these days, and is so different than my time at the school development program, is we actually have more money, more funding, more philanthropic aspects happening, but they're fragmented, they're narrow, they're creating 5,000 websites, 25,000 reports, and it's not making any difference because they don't talk to each other. They don't connect with one another. They don't see how their work comes together, and it's the very comprehensiveness of the school development program that still continues to give me hope. And I just want to shout out, you know, the particular time that I was here, which was the 1990s, because there were folks who made audacious bets, who put themselves forward, and we were able to make a period of time in which we not only did whole school change, but we grew a network around the school that made things differently. And it all started with the ridiculous fact that Rockefeller Foundation under Hugh Price and Marla Uselli gave us 10 years. We didn't have to come back and say how many schools we had changed. We had to come back and say how we were better at changing schools. That's what they wanted to hear from us. They didn't want to, when our kits that we sent out to everybody made no difference, we had to come back and had to have a different idea. And we were blessed to find so many people who are sitting in this room right now who took that single page with the schoolhouse. That is such a profound piece of paper. You don't really need much else besides that. It's that thing that is simple but not simplistic. And you give that to folks in schools and it names what they want to do. We had wonderful, productive district partnerships. Prince George's County, Jan Stoklinski, Sheila Jackson, unbelievable work that they were able to do. We had the crazy notion in Chicago we were going to work with a social work agency. What is that all about? Those schools on the west side of Chicago were so hurt, so humanly torn apart, that if we had not gone in the psychosocial drawer, we'd be still sitting in the parking lot right now. And youth guidance under Vivian and all her team that's here today, unbelievable powerful work. We were able to create demonstration schools where you could come and see a school where it was starting and how hard it was. We didn't have great schools, we had improving schools. We had schools that would go forward and back and forward and back, but they were in the process and the kids were getting better. And you could see it at any stage, and that was part of the work that was real and really spoke to teachers. We moved next to do what was called systemic work. Ed Joyner in particular helped design this notion that central office is a critical partner in this. Lily Jones in Guilford County was able to work with Jerry Weiss, the superintendent, and reorganize central office so it mapped onto that model that you see in that piece of paper. So community services work with the parent team. Instructional people work with the SPMT. Psychosocial people work with the SST. So you didn't have to call 8 people in central office. We worked that way in Detroit, and I hope John Zeraldo's still here in Skillman, which helped fund an amazing kind of change that happened in Detroit. And we work with teacher prep programs. And I have to say, having just finished leading one, I needed a Comer partner between me and the schools. Because ultimately, changing teacher prep is inevitably changing schools. And you need a partner that pushes my higher ed institution to have different reward systems, and you need to have them pushing the school district system to have them really honor the commitment. And that joint work between those two groups was incredibly important. And a couple of key other partnerships. You know, Herman talked about, but the Comer-Ziegler project in that building, that meant that the 4th grade teacher, 4-year-old teacher, who was best friends with the 5th grade teacher, brought all that developmental knowledge that we give early childhood folk, but we don't give elementary folk. And it brought that 5th grade teacher to have a sandbox in her room that 5th graders used to do play that was applied to the learning that they were doing. And Literacy for All with Ed Murray, where we were able to stack on top of that an incredible literacy program that made a huge difference. The bottom line is, we grew beyond the single school focus. We grew and created networks around that began to sustain the kinds of environment that you need to have happen. If we leave it to single schools, we have 1,000 individual examples of shooting stars that shoot, and when you, it'll like a Tetris, you pull one piece out, the leader leaves, or a change in superintendent, and they collapse down. I'm most optimistic with the policy work that's happening with this knowledge base that we can be both up from the policy side, grow those connectivities, and no one is better than the school development to do that, because as someone said, those guiding principles are not just how you make change, but they are a way of changing entire communities. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of that, sir.
So I'm going to ask one more question of all of our panelists that builds on what Jack just said. And then I'm going to turn to you. So jot down your questions, because in just a few moments you'll have an opportunity to get those burning questions answered. So Jack just kind of described how what we really need is not just a school development program, but a district and state development program as well. All the pieces that come comprehensively together. So I want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to respond to the question of what is it that a state and or district, as well as school leadership, can do to really bring a whole child philosophy and the features of a developmental approach to all the schools in the state or district, as well as to an individual school. I'm going to start with you, Dianna, and give you first dibs on that question.
Well, thank you. I think that one of the things that you said earlier, Linda, that I wanted to return to is the idea of systems and structures. Because each of us in our different roles contributes to the systems and structures that support a school and a school community, as well as a community, a city or a municipality, to support the kids and families. So we've really tried to put a lot of energy toward, from our place, what can we provide in terms of support structures, incentives, and recognition. Years and years ago, I heard you say that educators change when we feel the heat or see the light. And I've always thought that while we need some of both, one of the things that the state sometimes struggles to do is provide the light, because we're very mired in the heat. So we're trying to get the recipe right with light and heat. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier had to do, and Dr. Burks mentioned as well, with the learning of the adults who are engaged with the development and learning of our children. And so one of the things that our state board took on was guidance on professional learning to go along with the policy moves that we were making to make sure that the 50,000 plus teachers, the thousands of leaders in our system, the paraprofessionals and everyone else that works with kids has the chance to grow and develop in our schools and communities as well. And the component, I was really gratified to hear that all of the components you mentioned are part of our system, but our board, and I want to especially thank Mr. Eric Clemens, who you'll hear from this afternoon from our state board. Our board felt that our work was good, but not quite there yet. And I really appreciate that kind of relationship where we're pushed to do better. And what we were missing was cultural responsiveness. So our board insisted that we take it back to the drawing board to work with the leaders and thinkers in the field, and added to our principles of professional learning as the #1 principle is that all learning with all learners be done in a way that is culturally responsive. So I think that's an example of a structure and a system that from a policy perspective we've been able to contribute. Recently, we've published 7 of a set that will eventually be more. I think we have 11 on deck for this year of evidence-based guides. And the new requirement, and this is an example where I think policy can be helpful too, the requirement that the Title I and other kinds of federal dollars that we use to improve outcomes for kids, that they need to be used in ways that research demonstrates are effective. It sounds so simple, and maybe you would think we were always doing that, but I think it's adding some really important structure that connects research to practice. And we have published 7 evidence-based guides to accompany our districts thinking about their improvement efforts. And of course, in our evidence-based guide on social-emotional learning, we were so pleased and proud to feature the school development model. And I think that really shining a light for local decision makers on effective research-based, evidence-based models and practices is one of the things a state can do to put structures in place that help guide the decision-making we want to see happen for our kids and our communities.
Terrific, thank you. Dr. Clark, what would you like to add about that?
I'm going to be very brief on this because it's an easy question, but yet it's a hard question. Politics gets in the way of so many things. And I think politics have gotten in the way of education right now. We can't even get our minds to come together. We still look at competency tests as the #1 priority for education. And that's it. And if you can't pass the competency test, then nothing else matters. After spending 36 years in public school, I'm on the university level. That's even more political. I look at our curriculum, and we're preparing persons to become teachers and administrators, and the curriculum is saying so much about different theories going on. It doesn't say too much of what they should do in the classroom to help. And we have to kind of modify some things. So again, the General Assembly, I'm at these meetings many times. I'm listening to our elected legislators. We're not even on the same one accord there. And what they look at as priorities for education, we don't have that here. So I don't know. I really don't know.
I'll just say, when you talk about the theories disconnected from the practice, having worked in higher ed for many years, one of the things we did when we redesigned the Stanford Teacher Ed programs, we made every course had to have as its primary goal and assessment connections to the classroom, which teachers are in a full year of student teaching so they can connect everything they do to the classroom. No disconnected theories. It's kind of like theory. There's nothing as practical as a good theory, but you got to be able to apply the work directly to the classroom. I think the same is true for principal programs, that we've got to help our colleagues in universities, and our licensure requirements and so on should really press for that. So I really appreciate you raising that dilemma for us. Dr. Burks, what do you think districts and the state should be doing to promote this work?
My comments kind of build upon what Commissioner Wentzell said. One, collectively as a district, we need to take the lead in New Haven on, just basically working with everyone to have shared beliefs, as well as put in some structures and practices around our thinking about social-emotional learning and how we develop the whole child. We've done some work internally, and we've established a theoretical frame, but only a few of us know about it. So as a system, we need to scale and bring others into the conversation about our thinking about how we educate the whole child. We are a very people-rich community, and we have every researcher and scholar, throughout the country here, but we have not worked collaboratively to have one vision about what it means to support social-emotional learning. So if you talk with, our team, they'll say, we're doing restorative practices, we're doing PBIS, we're doing all these things, cultural competence, but not with not intentionality, and we're not thoughtful about what it means to our entire learning community. We need to spend a lot of time educating from our board members and to everyone throughout our district, as well as providing preparation for our teachers, new teachers, as well as some of our veteran teachers as well, about our thinking about the whole child, as well as the people that work with us. We have some phenomenal clinicians that we work with throughout the city, but there's varied approaches as to how we get at social-emotional learning. And so my team has been tasked, and some of them are sitting in the right corner over there like, oh no, now she's made it public. They've been tasked with, one, doing some internal work around our thinking about social-emotional learning, with some of the, incorporating the best practices and how we develop the whole child, as well as engaging the clinicians that are working with us to have a collective vision so that we can now rally a public, rally around, this is our thinking in the New Haven way of how we educate children, not just cognitively, but as well as meeting their affective developmental needs, social, emotional, whatever research you're using. So to make sure that we ensure that all of our students are successful. Until we do that, we'll still have all these pockets of we're doing this, we're doing that, as opposed to one way approach of how we educate our children.
Excellent, thank you. So Jack, you get the last word, and then I'm going to turn to the audience.
So as I was thinking about my answer to this question, I actually was remembering the very first time I presented at one of the academies. And I'm a very head kind of person. I really did my homework. I thought about all the elements of the SDP program. I had it up, I had PowerPoints, I was going like a band. I had people looking at this, thinking about that. I got a nice applause. I sat down next to Doc and I said, Doc, how'd I do? Jack, you were just terrific. You just missed the whole point. It's about relationships. It's about relationships. And to me, it's not just about your head, it's about what's here. It's about how do you move from yo fault to no fault, because right now with yo fault, everybody is beating up against each other. And I have to say, one of the great things about moving up to the Boston area is people were less in their corners in the different parts of the organization. I found Connecticut, at least when I was here 8 years ago, you had one group over here and they're all fighting each other. Up in Boston, everybody recognized this is tough and we've all been humbled. How do we talk to each other? How do we listen to each other? And the other thing that's always great, you know, I'm an educator by profession and Doc is a psychiatrist, and he taught me a long time ago, you can listen people into a new position faster than you can talk them into that position. You already know what I'm going to say, so you just go on auto hold, right, while they do their blah, 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 and then you say, I'm for child development, blah, blah, blah. You know, you listen to what's driving that particular position so you can find common ground. And the only common ground that's necessary for people to unite is this unrelenting belief. And there's a wonderful quote from Charles Payne's book, his History of the Upper Mississippi Delta, where he talks about, we all focus on the courage, but the key was the absolute unrelenting belief of the extraordinary things that ordinary people can do. And if you have that perspective and you find common ground, all those relationships will happen and all the rest will be taken care of. So that's all it has. That's all you got to do.
So we are going to listen our way into good policy, and would love to see who has comments or questions. And we have a mic available here. So who would like to kick us off? There we go in the back over there. Please say who you are also as you introduce your comment.
Absolutely. Good morning. My name is Sheila Jackson. I'm from Prince County Public Schools, where we have been we have been delighted to have been partners in learning with Dr. Comer for over 30 years. We're so excited, and thank you, panel, for your key insights this morning. And Dr. Gillette, you mentioned the game of Tetris, and we often feel like that. And I was just wondering, what advice can our panel, our distinguished panel, give us about sustainability? Our districts go through so much turnover, and what do you think it takes for us to keep this model alive and keep it going? So could you talk about sustainability for us?
Who would like to take that on? It's a tough question.
I mean, I think some of it is the wider your network, the more lateral supports you have, the more vertical supports you have. We had a whole system, actually in PG for a while, so that when a principal who was a strong Comer supporter was being replaced, they would be interviewed by the school to make sure they had the same philosophical bent. That went for a little while, but that went away because we didn't have enough support at the board level. I mean, it really is building those lateral structures so that Tetris, you can pull a piece out, but it's got those kind of other pins that hold it together. And I think that's what's so great about the national work with the Aspen Institute, et cetera, trying to work that consciousness down so that it becomes a standard operating procedure in districts. You see more portfolio districts that are working that way, and they're committed to having those kind of strong, unified, common ideologies in schools. Because in some cases, it doesn't matter. We've seen school development programs that have this literacy program or that. That's really secondary to all the adults totally committed to a particular direction and understanding who kids are. So I think that's one of the ways that you can do it, and I think you hear it in the remarks of the folks up here, which is very optimistic.
I think there, too, that there's an old saying, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. And sometimes when leaders come to replace other leaders, they want to bring their own program along. Something could be already working well, but I didn't do it, and so I'm going to change it. And everything doesn't need a change.
Can I just add to that? I think it's such a profound point that I've watched this in many, many districts. I was working on a lot of school redesign work in New York when we had new commissioners and chancellors every 18 months and so on. It's really important for people in schools to speak up immediately and vocally, and to say, this matters to us, and don't wait to just hear what's coming down. Say, we've got something to tell you about what's working here, because there is this tendency in our country for every new leader to bring in a new set of magic silver bullets rather than saying, what's working here and how do we build it? Dianna?
I think one of the things is, again, thinking about each of us with our sphere of influence, and one of the things we've worked on a lot at the department is we believe that public schools belong to the public, and that the more voices that we're hearing, the better we will be at serving our state and our communities. And we've kind of made our team tagline that it's a chorus, not a solo. So that we share the work together, because different members of our team have different areas of expertise, and we, like a lot of state departments or SEAs, were very siloed for a long time. And in some ways, the difficult economic times and not being able to hire staff have made us all take on things together that before we would have had somebody to do it. So now that's in some ways strengthened us, not that we wouldn't welcome better economic times and actual staff to do the work and things, but that idea of it's a chorus, not a solo, has led us to try to work with our stakeholders across different sectors to try to own the work together. And I think one of the greatest examples I've seen in my time at the State Department of Ed in that is with our higher ed partners. And a couple of them are here in the room today. I know Dr. Hegedus is here and Dr. Alfano is here, and our leaders in higher ed, we're of course with Dr. Comer and here at Yale, which is like such an amazing place in Connecticut to be with a long history. Our leaders in higher ed have really been so thoughtful in the last several years about your points around what do teachers need before they enter, what do leaders need as they progress, so that we make sure that education is not just social reproduction, that we don't do what we saw, and instead we do what we want to see.
Yeah, that is such a great point. I was just thinking the same thing, that the continuity, if you think about, and of course Dr. Comer has always brought this to our attention, if you think about in medicine, there is a strong, deep, highly consensual training system that everybody experiences. So it'd be very odd to find somebody coming into psychology or psychiatry without a knowledge base about child development or adult development. And quite often the virtue of the fact that higher ed is hard to change is that it doesn't change as much. It doesn't have as big of a pendulum. So if we can really build that system so that everyone is getting a foundation, and that the professional development schools or partner schools that the higher ed institutions use as training grounds for student teaching or internships are school development schools, where you see it in action, you could get, it would be hard for somebody to shake that commitment and that knowledge base out of existence, even when superintendents change and school boards change so much more frequently. We've got another question over here. I think this is the higher ed table over here.
Good. Yes, still good morning. I agree with a couple of points.
Say who you are, and then make your comment or question.
I'm professor of education at Southern State University and a former member of the Committee for Education. I agree with everything that Jack said, but 2 points really stick out. One is that it's all about relationships. And secondly, that in his time in New we realized that it's not the same as law school. We have all these relationships clashing all the time and so forth. I heard Dr. Burks talk about shared beliefs, but I realized that we don't have the kind of relationships here to do that. And what reminds me is of the adage that a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And so, what plan do you have as a board have in you to deal with the relationships? Because without that, it ain't going nowhere.
So thank you, Dr. Torrey, for the question. So as you know, sustained change is an iterative process, and it takes time. And so as part of my entry to this role, I've been very thoughtful about going into the community, having sessions, giving people opportunity for voice through my town hall community meetings, as well as my coffee conversations, and listening to thinking of people, meeting one-on-one with various groups, as well as my internal team. And we, as part of my transition team work, I was very, and people thought I was kind of crazy for doing this, but I had more than 70 people on my transition team. And someone who is a scholar of educational leadership knows that's just something you don't do, because you can't get people to have a collective thinking and get to consensus, and you have lots of pushes and pulls. But we are going to create structures here in the district to engage people in a lot of decision making. And I think there's some evidence that we've tried, and we've been making some attempts at that. And I know it's going to take some organized, thoughtful planning about having people enter into the conversation and feel like they're part of the conversation, and getting people to help solve the problems. So, and that's why we've done such extensive outreach, because I know that this community is very passionate. This community needs some healing. We went through, and I mentioned, kind of skirted over the superintendent selection process, but people felt a lot of pain through that process and didn't feel like they had voice in decision making. And so, as superintendent, as my team, we're willing to extend ourselves and get people in the helping to co-create our district, as well as, I've been using the term right size and reimagining those terms, because we need to reimagine the work that we're doing. What we have done in New Haven has been successful for the time. But we're in different times. We're in different fiscal times. We have a lot more state accountability, Commissioner. And so there are a lot of things that we have to answer and do. But it's going to take the collective geniuses of everyone within this community to help move this work forward. And as leader of this district, and I call myself chief teacher of this district, I'm willing to create those task force, because I don't really like committee work. Because, we sit in the committee, we talk, and we talk about, you have lots of intellectual discourse about what people think and feel. But to put together task force to, one, and to give an example around our social-emotional learning work. Like I said, there's some good things are happening, but I want to move that to great. But I said, I'm willing to work collaboratively with all leaders, everyone in the system, to have people feel like they have an entry point to help make decisions. And I know through those, I will work to build those relationships as well as my team, but in a purposeful way. Communication, I know, is paramount. We're going to work on strengthening our communications. People feel as though they make up their own narratives if we don't give them the brutal facts. And I've been actually accused of being too transparent at fault about what's happening. So I've shared with people some of the stuff that's not so attractive to share. People are like, she actually told us that? Yes, I'm gonna tell you the brutal reality of what's happening in the system. And I invite everyone in this room, everyone in this community to join me, because our students, they need us. We have lots of, and I'm glad you opened the door, because I want to be polite in this conversation, but I'm gonna be transparent. We have so many other agendas, and we need people on the kid agenda. There's so many, if you'd be amazed by the conversations I have that aren't about children. And some days I say to some of my colleagues, I'm like, just tell me something about literacy today. Tell me something great that a child has done. We've focused on, at the board meeting, we make sure we highlight students every board meeting. And I don't care if it takes 2 hours to have them sing, dance, and jump up and down. We have to get people to remember that our core business is to protect the instructional core. And that's the relationship between students, teachers, and content. And that is our first job, to make sure that our students are educated, despite what other people are feeling and thinking. We gotta think about what the students are feeling and thinking. And we will spend a lot of time educating, partnering with everyone that we can, because like I said, there's brilliance in this room, and I have a few people I want your phone numbers, because we need help. I can't do this work alone, but we need to reimagine and reframe our thinking about how we educate our children. So thank you.
We need a mic right, yes, there we go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Dr. Phil as well, and I am from the Chicago group.
Woo!
Hi, Jack. It's good to see everybody again. I'm going to address this from wisdom of a lot of gray hair that somehow hit But I'm going to go back to, when I say this, I'm going to go back to my early days of teaching in the Archdiocese of Chicago in 1962. When we held up the model of the parent, the teacher, and the child. And I became very interested in the work of Dr. Comer because it kind of was a follow-up to that model and superseded it and went far beyond. I've worked at every level of education over my career, teaching, principal administration, university, teaching practices, and I was the assistant superintendent for the state. Now, I'm not telling you all of that so that you can say, well, she's standing here giving out her resume. But what I am going to share with you is the fact that among my colleagues over the last few years, I've become cynical, questioning, very unsure, not really knowing where we are in the educational field and where we should be going with our youngsters. The one thing I do want to share with you is this. I'm the grandmother of 6 and the great-grandmother of 2 legitimate that I know. I'm not going to say legitimate. That's right, because children are not illegitimate. Children are here because they are here. But 2 that I know real well. But I'm so extremely proud of those kids and their intellectual growth. They are all just doing fantastic. But I'm going to tell you why I think that they're fantastic, and I think it's because of their parents. Because their parents have expectations of them that I don't know, I had expectations, but I think that I didn't have all of the skills and all of the whatever that these parents have today. I think that we as teachers took on the responsibility and said, well, they bring them to us, we're supposed to help them with their academics, and that's our job, our job, our job. It's not really just our job. It is theirs. They were the parents, they are the first educators. And so we need to begin to figure out even stronger ways that go beyond the model of our parent-teacher organizations and the parent programs that we have. Anything that we can do to help to build the parents up are going to certainly make a difference in the work that we're doing in the schools.
That's great. I'm going to turn that into a question by asking our panel to respond to the ways in which you think that parent connection can be strengthened and should be strengthened. Diane, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Well, one of the things that I think is really important is, again, providing frameworks. And so we put forward just this week a published framework for parent engagement that was co-created with a group that we began about 3 years ago. We have a commissioners roundtable on parent engagement because in the run-up to developing our ESSA plan, we realized that we had a go-to group for everybody in education except our parents, and that we needed to bring together people who were engaged with parents in lots of different ways. So it's a much different group than when we bring together our superintendents or our principals or our teacher groups or our deans or whomever. It's lots of different groups. So we meet quarterly, and the work initially was to elicit a vision around public education that could become part of our plan for how federal funds are allocated. But now we have asked them, what's the work we need to do to be of service so that our schools and our districts can engage parents in full, equal, and equitable partnerships. So that work is something that I'm really excited to watch develop. I will be glad when my time finishes shortly to leave that as a permanent structure that is now part of how the department does business. So I think your points are really important, that the partnership with the families and the parent, whether we think about it, the parent, the child, and the teacher, but also how the schools and districts create structures that support that and also honor what the parents know about their children, you know, and strengthen the connection between parents and schools and the community and schools. So as we see more and more good research in that area, bringing it into some practical, our next step is a number of practical sort of things to support. So we put out a number of what does full, equal, and equitable partnerships look like in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, after-school programs. We got the feedback from our group that we really need to do some work around special education and make sure that we're more than just the rules, more than sort of what are you supposed to do when you do a PPT or something, but what does a full, equitable, and equal partnership look like when a student needs special services. So that's sort of our next steps.
Dr. Clark, you want to
Parent
answer?
involvement is very important. Well, people, my parents got felonies. I'm located in that trouble zone, and if you go by what you should go, we can't have parents inside the school working if they have a poor background. And so what we did, even though we had a lot of parents involved, we could have had more. We went on their turf. We used the recreation center, and we had parent involvement that way.
So family and community empowerment is one of our key priorities. So oftentimes we say we want parents involved, but I believe empowering parents to be active in the work of moving the district forward. And so as part of our vision is that we are establishing a superintendent's parent advisory council. So we're going to get our principals involved in recommending who those parent leaders should be to serve as advisors to me as the superintendent. We also are engaging some work with Michelle Brooks and people who know her work from the work she's done in Boston, establishing Parent University and really empower parents to be on the front line in promoting change. She's going to do some strategic planning with our parents so that they identify some core objectives to cover as a year. So we have a plan that coincides with our district improvement plan. And we also intend to establish our own parent university. I know as a district we've had one previously, and so we are going to reimagine the parent university so that people feel like they have active voice and begin to, similar to the way that we educate our own leaders and teachers, to share best practices about literacy, mathematics, special education, such with parents throughout the community so they feel like they are actively involved in our learning community, because we're one learning community.
I just say one of the great tragedies of the last 40 years or so is as this sort of no excuses movement saying that schools alone can do this work, and evidence in many cases that schools can overcome all kinds of barriers. We've turned a blind eye to continued hyper-segregation of our communities of color and rapacious business practices, particularly around rent and development of any kind of equity in anyone's home, constantly tearing whatever small resources those communities have, on top of a policing practice that is overly aggressive on small things. But if there's a homicide rates of completion are the same rate of completion they were in the 1830s, about 15%. So if you're in a community of color, you can get a ticket, but if you shoot somebody, you're going to go scot-free, and that creates a community that is under siege. And we've allowed this to happen, and anyone who is taught in an urban school sees those tragedies of those effects directly in their children every single day, and we have to do both.
I want to add one more point on the engagement of parents, and I'm glad you mentioned grandparents as well, as a new grandparent, thank you. There are a lot of practices and policies that have to be changed in the way schools operate if we're going to engage parents in the ways that they should, and also in pre-service education. And so, I really have taken up this dilemma in a work that I've done with high school that we started in a community in East Palo Alto, right across the bridge from Palo Alto, one of those divided communities, where they had lost their high school in desegregation, and all the kids were all bussed out. 2/3 were dropping out. We were asked by the elementary school superintendent to come start a high school in the community, and we were told the parents would never participate. And we ended up with 100% parent participation and 90% of the kids graduating and going to college. But we did that because of the way we changed both pre-service education and the policies in the school. One is training teachers to be able to reach out and engage parents as experts. And so our pre-service teachers had to make positive phone calls home, and parents are shocked when they get a positive phone call home. We just want to tell you about how your child is doing X, Y, and Z and how wonderful it is. They had to learn to do home visits. They were terrified. But, how do you reach out and actually meet with parents on their turf, in their way? Sometimes parents don't want to meet in the home. That's fine. You find another place, recreation center, at the school or whatever. But you have to train people from that from the beginning. And then in this school, every parent would get a positive phone call home in the first week of school. Just changes the whole relationship. Advisors had about 18 kids they advised, so the advisors were responsible. High school teachers can't call 215 parents, which is the class or the pupil load in Los Angeles right now, but they can call 18 and begin that relationship, trade the phone numbers, figure out when you're going to meet within the first month of school. Do you want me to come to your home? Do you want to come to the school? Do you want to meet somewhere else? Start the relationship. Get the process changed. In most schools, if you have a problem that you need to talk to teachers about, you have to call 8 different teachers in a high school. They don't have phones, so how are you going to get a hold of them? How are you going to meet with them? You have to have a point of contact that is regular and reliable. You have to have, a way that those meetings happen during the year. We had student-teacher-parent conferences 4 times a year with the advisor, and then some teachers would join as needed. Most parents come, if they can, to back-to-school night, and they're told this is not the place to talk about your child. Well, what is the place to talk about your child, right? So you've got to create that place. You have to pay for teachers to have the time in the weekends, in the evenings, when the parents are available, to actually make it possible for parents who have 2 jobs or whatever to actually engage. Kids did portfolios and exhibitions, and parents were always invited to be part of the panel. And they would come, when grandparents and aunts and uncles and guardians. So you think about family, not just the parent, who may or may not be able to come themselves. So my point is that we have to, we've got some mechanisms that are already operating. 3 parents get to sit on the school advisory committee, and, some parents get to come to the back-to-school night. But we have to really change the whole framework if we're going to have the kind of parent and school relationship. School development program, of course, has parents involved in every imaginable way. Assisting if they can in the school, coming to the same development opportunities that staff are involved in, and being involved in the outreach. And when we think about district policies and state policies, there are dollars involved, and there are schedules involved, and there are all kinds of things that, are just very fundamental to the old factory model. We have one more question I'd like to take, and I've gotten permission for us to have our last question, so thank you. Yes, yes.
We have so many educators who judge our hands. But we wouldn't have jobs if we didn't have hands. So you can't just talk parent engagement. You have to go to the school and start with everybody. You have to provide training for the staff. And that's why we're not provide training. Every time we come to training, give a team building activity on this type of thing. But what I want to share with you, you can't have parents involved if you don't want them in the house. The school belongs to the community. How do you all say that? The school belongs to the community. We've been doing this for a while. We keep our home hat all the time. Home hat and pillow hat all the time. And so we have been doing a 25 years, we do an overnight conference. Well, all the parents across the city, in various urban areas as well, we train them continuously. They come. They pay to come. They usually parent advisory council. I want you to get 25 years last year. Guess what? I want to do Oprah Winfrey. I want to stop at 25 years. They said, you can't stop this. We've already been doing it. Now children change. You all make a difference. Don't change. So we're doing it in April. So what I share with you, we provide professionals with many parents said to me a long time ago, I shared it at the table before. They said, don't train us. We're not animals. I had to change my language with me. We're not animals. But what? Parent professionals are for us. Not changing our language. So I'm asking you all, parents are people too. They care about their children. They care about their children. And then we assume that they don't care. And I'm going to share with you about the workshops that we have. We also have polarized many of our parents. We had one parent which was grandmother, two grandparents. One of the grandparents shared with us, she said to me, Ms. Detail, I am a better grandparent and a great grandparent because of the home process. Many years ago, come on, somebody, think about that. And you know, like younger parents, we really the younger parents. I'm going to share with you working at Peace House. A young parent said, we don't come to the school because we're sitting there and judging us. Talk about what we got pregnant. Okay, as if pregnancy got resistant with some of those issues. So we have to be more listening. They don't want to solve their problems. They just want you to listen to them. They can figure it out. And now we got parents call monitors. We got parents maybe volunteers as lunch monitors. I went to the school, we launched on my Christmas Jeff Elementary School. I was home facilitator there. So maybe a little, I'll tell you, I said, I'm going to organize parents working training, not training, but professional development. We keep you on top of that. We had 30-something parents in there. They had to take discipline problems with their school, and 30 parents, they got nothing for the side. But guess what? We had no discipline problems. We had hall months, lunch months. Many came out to tutor and we changed the entire social training. So please, parents make a difference.
Yes.
You just believe in it. Okay? And it can never be listened because of us. Continue to educate parents, welcome them in, and lay down, welcome them out. Because it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a healthy village to raise a child.
I love it. That is a perfect note on which to end our wonderful morning. Please join me in thanking this spectacular panel. And our wonderful Dr. Faye Brown is going to tell us what happens next. Thank you.
Next. You were fantastic as always. Thank you to Dr. Darling-Hammond. Woohoo! Yeah, and our wonderful panel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging in with us. And I hope you plan to hang with us for the rest of the day. It is now 12:09. So they finished early, so that's wonderful. So we have made up about 5 minutes or so of our time. Just want to say, just before we rush out to lunch, though, if you have been, you know, when Jack spoke, I thought about this. If you have been a Comer, if you are currently Comer faculty or staff, if you are former Comer faculty or staff, if you are a Comer facilitator currently in your district, or if you have worked as Comer facilitator in your district, would you please stand, please? Any of those roles, any of those roles, any of those roles. Woo-hoo! Let's hear it for our Comer folks. Yeah, woo-hoo! Woo-hoo! Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As Dr. Comer say all the time, without the folks on the ground. Without us going into the schools, being in our buildings, working hard, we couldn't get the job done. And those of us who are at the Yale office, without our partners in the field out there working hard, the Comer process could not be implemented. So we are grateful to all of you for hanging in there, doing the job out there very well. And so it's lunchtime. You have 30 minutes for lunch. It's now 12. Vivian, you wanted to say something quickly? Principals also, absolutely. You, especially those, yeah, woohoo, yeah, woo, yeah, woo.
What about the teachers?
And our Comer teachers. Woo. You know, as a matter of fact, just to everybody in the room who are Comerized, let's hear it for everybody in the room. Woo!